A quadratic trig equation is one like this. Quadratic trig equations, they're not the most practical equations, like they don't come up in the real world so often. However, they're interesting because they have four solutions. What you do is you factor them. You almost treated it was like u squared minus u minus 6 equals 0 would be u minus 3u plus 2. So this is going to be tan x minus 3. Tan x plus 2 equals 0. This leads us to tan x equals 3 or tan x equals negative 2. Each of these is going to lead us to a reference angle. Tan inverse of 3 is 71 degrees. Tangent's positive in quadrants 1 and 3, so I have a 71, or 72 degrees actually. 72, or quadrant 3, which is 180 plus 72, which is 252. But that's only two of the answers. Here, we get another reference angle. I'll call this reference angle 1. Reference angle 2 is tan inverse of regular 2. That gives us about 63 degrees. That's not either of the other two answers. Tangent is negative in quadrants 2 and 4. So 180 minus 63 is about 117. And in quadrant 4, 360 minus 63 is 297. So 4 answers. When the thing that's being squared in the equation is sine or cosine, there's sometimes not 4 answers. Look at what happens here. You factor 2 sine x. I'm going to put a minus 1 here and a plus 1 here. That way I get minus 2 sine x plus 1 sine x is negative sine x. So we get 2 sine x equals negative 1, or sine x equals negative 1 half. The reference angle is sine inverse of regular a half, which is 30 degrees. But sine's negative in quadrants 3 and 4, so I get my answers of 210 or 330. On the other hand, we potentially have 2 more answers. Sine x equals 1. Well, sine x equals 1, we don't do reference angles for that. I like a unit circle, and the y-coordinate is 1 up here, so x equals 90. So here's one that had 3 answers. This question is a little bit deceptive. It might be tempting to divide both sides by sine x, but you will be better off if you move the sine x over to one side and then factor it out, because now I have either sine x equals 0, which is at 0, 180, and 360, or sine x equals 1, which is x is 90. If instead I divided both sides by sine x, I would get just sine x equals 1, which would just be one answer. But really there were 4 answers. Some people don't include 0 and 360 because they're like the same thing, but it depends how the question is worded. Here's an equation that looks really difficult. The trick to it is going to be to subtract 2 cosine x from both sides and then divide both sides by cosine x. And this becomes tangent x equals negative 2, which we saw before had a reference angle of 3 and 2 answers, tangents negative in quadrants 2 and 4, so 117 or 297. So this isn't a quadratic, but still a more complicated equation that's got 2 different trig expressions. And then a question that people really struggle with. This is a quadratic equation that's got sine and cosine in it. It seems almost impossible. But the trick is to replace sine squared with 1 minus cosine squared x. And there's a lot of opportunities to make mistakes here. But now I have minus 3 cosine squared x plus 2 cosine x plus 1 equals 0. And I'll get rid of the negative by changing this to a plus, this to a minus, this to a minus. And now I have an expression that's just got cosine in. She factors to 3 cosine x plus 1, cosine x minus 1. And then we're still needing to get potentially 4 answers. Cosine x is equal to negative 1/3. That has a reference angle of 71, but the answers, cosine is negative in quadrants 2 and 3, so about 110 and 250. On the other hand, we also have cosine equals 1. I like to picture the unit circle, and there's only one spot where cosine with an x-coordinate is 1. Or if you like, you can make that one. You can even put 360. It all depends on what they ask for. Sometimes we see something like this. Tan x minus 8 cotan x equals 2. If we change cotan into 8 over tan, and then multiply both sides by tan, whoops, it just becomes 8. And then move everything over to one side. So that's another thing that can happen in these trig equations where you have two different things. So there's this kind with reciprocal turning into a quadratic. There's this kind where one sine squared and you want cosine, so you use the sine squared equals 1 minus cosine squared. There's this kind where somehow we end up getting a tangent. And these can be pretty complicated equations, so you want to practice them and study them.